worked on?
Sure, I'll keep it to a bit because otherwise this list will get very long. But I started out my career in the game world at Fantasy Flight Games all the way back in 2011. And I was fortunate enough to work on both editions of X-Wing, Star Wars Armada, and then design Star Wars Legion. I followed that up with a little brief stint at WizKids, working on a variety of games over there. And now I am here on Valhalla, clearly, reporting live from Revna's secret cavern and working on Heroscape.
Well, it's awesome to have you here. I mean, X-Wing and Star Wars in general are personal favorites of mine. They hold a special spot in my heart. So I'm thrilled to have you part of our Heroscape fam. So thank you, Alex. Next up,
Happy to be here.
Rowan, could you share a little bit about your background and the games you've been involved with?
Absolutely not. No.
Oh.
Some of you might know me, some of you might not. If you do know me and not from Heroscape, you probably know me from my work with Atomic Mass Games, where I worked on Marvel Crisis Protocol and was in on the ground floor of Star Wars Shatterpoint. Keeping it brief, like Alex said.
I mean, I already knew those things about you, but it's awesome to hear it again. Also, it's weird that we never crossed paths during our time at Asmodee and Atomic Mass Games. Maybe they're just afraid to have us work together. I don't know. But I'm glad we get to work together now. It wasn't.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah,
it
knew
wasn't
it would be trouble.
time yet. Right? Probably. So, Dylan, your turn. Tell us a bit about your journey and your work with Renegade Game Studios.
Yeah, hey, I'm Dylan. I have been playing Heroscape since Maladon's Prophecy, so almost the very beginning. I saw orcs fighting robots, fighting secret agents, and was like, done, sold, buying all of it. Was part of the customs community for Heroscape for a bit. Am so stoked to be working on it now. I've bounced through various other things in the war games sphere between then and now, but in 100% making new Heroscape with this lovely team, so stoked.
I'm also stoked to have you on board. You've been such a great addition to the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess now we're going to get started on questions. We'll start with Alex.
I love Dylan.
Can you walk us through the development process for an army expansion in Heroscape from concept to final playtesting?
Yeah, that's a great question because there is a lot that goes into this from the development side and also, as you know, from the production side. But from the development side of things, we start with an idea. We start with a concept. And the beautiful thing about Heroscape is that the world is your oyster when it comes to this game, because if you can dream it, you can make it. And so, in contrast to a game that is sort of IP forward, like Star Wars game or Power Rangers game or something like that, this is a game where you can really, as a developer, let your imagination run wild. So just to give you an example, since I'm in Revna's caves here, we'll talk a little bit about an upcoming unit, the Revenant Acolytes. So Rowan had an awesome idea for this unit. These are followers of Revna who have pledged themselves to to Revna, body and soul, in life, in death. They live, they die, they live again. And they're really her most sort of, fanatical followers. So we needed to take that idea, that aesthetic, and that concept and turn it into a playable unit on the tabletop. So, we knew we wanted to have support abilities. We knew that we wanted it to, involve some sort of Revenant hero worship in game terms. So the first thing that we do is we map out, that initial design, those initial abilities. Then we have a period of internal playtesting that lasts for about a month, where we sort of kick the design around internally. We play with each other. This is the stage in development where we also bring in contractors from the old school Heroscape community, the designers, two of the designers on Age of Annihilation, in fact, Don Zimmerman and Adam Tarr, have a chance to look at these designs and work on them as well. After that, the designs go to Craig Van Ness, who old school Heroscape heads will know is one of the very first designers of the original game system. He weighs into it, and then it goes to an external game testing stage where we have members of the community, basically a curated collection of enthusiastic people from all walks of Heroscape, from your sort of casual dining room table players all the way up
I should say that's really cool that they send it to the original designer so that he gets a way on it because he can probably see so many things since he was so involved.
To your top tier competitive players, and then they analyze our designs, and it's an iterative process. So like, basically on a weekly or a bi-weekly cadence, we are taking that feedback, taking that experience, making changes, making tweaks, and ideally, moving towards a more perfect unit at the end of the day. So with the acolytes, we had some ideas for
the 220 mug,
how a resurrection mechanic would work and how they would relate to Revenant Heroes. And at first that involved a lot of D20 rolling and trying to get your acolytes back. But by the end of the playtesting process, it had been simplified and distilled down to resurrecting a single acolyte anywhere adjacent to a Revenant hero at the start of your round. And when they are adjacent to a Revenant hero, they provide a reroll to both attack and defense dice. So they are supporting their the heroes that they worship, and that is reflected both in the lore and on the tabletop. So that's
cool
just one aspect of it, because of course, and I'll hand it back over to you, Lee, there's the whole production, art, sculpting, manufacturing, product side of things too, which is a whole art form unto itself.
Oh my goodness, there's so much. So like with just game development in general, like you said, that's just one side of it. Like there's the production, there's marketing, there's keeping everything on schedule and within budget. Like that's all huge. And like I'm just thinking back to the Revenant acolytes, like when we were working with the sculptor, providing feedback, and the several rounds we went through with the sculpts, and then when we're figuring out colors for pre-painted version and stuff like that. Like, and that's just the, I'm going to call the pre-production side of it. The production side of it, like we're just getting started. So I believe I think next week, maybe the week after, I'll get to see some 3D prints of them. So very excited to see them. Wow.
I wonder how many there are.
I think that brings us to our next question. This will be for you, Rowan. How do you balance thematic elements with mechanics to create a functional yet immersive tabletop experience?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I like that you use the word balance in the question, because it is sort of a give and a take, a back and a forth. There's no one thing that always steers a design or always takes priority over the other. At the end of the day, a fun figure is understandable, and that makes its mechanics shine, and its mechanics shine, which makes it understandable. So it sort of feeds into itself in that loop. So as Alex just mentioned, sometimes a figure has a place in the world, and that sort of narrows the design space for the mechanics. An acolyte of Revna is likely to play off of Revna's themes. We want it to show off who Revna is, so it's going to have, I don't know, resurrection style abilities, or in the case of the acolytes, if they're worshiping the heroes, it sort of gives you this impression that perhaps there's a hierarchy inside of Revna's camps. Some information you can glean off of the card and how it works on the table, and these things sort of feed back and forth. We didn't have necessarily 100% of how these figures fit into the world ready at the beginning. Sometimes as we iterated on the design, new pieces of information would pop up and we would say, oh, that's how they fit into the story. That's it. That's how it works. And that is how sort of a new figure that didn't exist before comes into being. We look for something that needs to be filled in either the gameplay, the world, and ideally both, and see how we can push those two things together. There's something we want to expand upon the mechanics, there's something we want to expand upon in the story. How does that narrow the design space until there's only one thing that this thing can be? That's what we're going to make. That's half of it. The other half is sometimes we are making a new version of an existing character, which we've seen several times before. There are a few Raylans that have been around by now, and a few Drakes you might have seen in the past. So when we are making a new version of an existing character, that already does that work for us of narrowing their scope, because we know who they are. We've seen them before, and what we want to do is take somebody who is familiar and push them forward in their life. push them forward in their time zone and give you something that synergizes with who they are, so it still feels like Raylan, but say an upcoming Raylan.
It's fun though. It seems like they're really working to have the story incorporated with their abilities and their figures, so it's not just some figure. There's a reason for that figure.
Kiri or something like that. So you want to find a way to bring that onto her card. And like you said, Lee, also her physical design, all of these things reinforce each other. So it's not just about the name of an ability, vengeful, there, done. No, of course not. You want to have the mechanics on how she plays follow through with that. So what makes you vengeful? Well, maybe when something bad happens, you react to it. You know, those sorts of events play out both on her card and then, of course, in the narrative. We have the cards themselves, but as many of you already know, we also have monthly scenarios, which are going to expand on the story a lot larger. Those, of course, come with their own mechanics that tell a story, but we'll keep it with that for now. I think that answers the question.
For sure. Well, and like you said, and Alex sort of alluded to this, like some of our ideas, or sometimes it's just like, it's not to say like, oh, it's easy, but you know, it's not as complicated to nail it from the start as like, say something that we are going to have next year. No, 2026. It's not 2025 yet. So an exciting 2.0 that we're going to have at the beginning of 2026. I'm super excited for. And for that particular hero, it's very easy to nail down the theme. It's very easy to like nail down the gameplay and stuff like that. And then other times, like with the Revenant Acolytes, they're like, well, we want them to do this, but how does it work in Heroscape? Is this working? And we continue, like, you all continue to evolve the design through the development process. And I guess that brings us to our next question. I will bring it over to Dylan. Dylan, can you talk about iteration in game design and how often do our concepts change from their initial idea to their final version?
I like that
Always.
question. Yeah. I think it's important to look at the two parts of that question separately, in that what's the role of iteration in game design? Like, very high on the list. Iteration kind of is game design kind of is iteration in a lot of ways. You have an idea for a unit that you want to execute, you write up how you think it's going to be, you put it out, you play test it, you work on it, you then bring it back, you tweak maybe how an ability operates, what the target threshold is for something, what the various stats are, you put it back out, you try it again, you play 1, 2, 5, a dozen games with it, see how it's playing, get other people's opinions, tweak, iterate, try and distill it down to the best that it can possibly be. The other half of that question is, how often does a concept change during the development process? And ideally, not much. I think the fun part is you come in with a very strong concept, and then the game development process is trying to find the best way to execute that concept. So looking at another squad we've got coming out next year, the Molten Crustaceans are,
he called it.
they came in with this very strong concept of they are crabs made of lava, so they should drop lava when they die. Anyone who's familiar with Heroscape knows that that is a dangerous proposition.
Drop lava?
Powerful terrain type. But it's such a strong concept that through that long process of iteration and playtesting and development, we whittled it down to the version that makes the most sense and is both fun and balanced. So, you know, does it work to have it be molten lava all the time? No, obviously not. Does it work to have it just be roll, and if you roll high enough, drop molten lava? What's the right threshold for that where it feels both fun and rewarding for the player, but not oppressive for the other player? If it's high enough to be not oppressive, is it then rare enough to be not fun? Is there something we can do on the times where they don't roll molten lava? What about lava field? Oh, but that adds height, but that could be fun. And that sort of iterative process where you end up with a unit that when it dies, it usually drops lava field and sometimes drops molten lava, then you get a really fun unit that is just a delight to play. So that's the sort of way that that process works, all to serve the concept more so than to change the concept to serve gameplay.
Well, it's I would say it's definitely a challenge. And actually, speaking of challenges, Alex, what are some pitfalls in game design that frequently happen, and how do you avoid them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there are obvious, I think at this point, sort of known quantities in game design that you want to stay away from. I think one of the most hated mechanics in all of gaming is, skip a turn, lose your turn. Um, Obviously, anything that's taking agency away from players or causing players to not be able to play the game is a huge problem. That's probably the number one pitfall. But I think there are pitfalls as well when it comes to developing for a game with an existing structure, rule set, history, batch of units, that kind of thing as well, because you have to be careful to integrate your new designs with the old stuff in a holistic context, right? We all live in a context, as the meme goes, uh, and it's important to understand that Heroscape's been around for a very long time. It is a beloved game. It's a beloved world, and that is a world that has been developed, iterated on, designed by so many different people at this point, and has the torch has been carried by the community. So you've got all of these different kind of eras of Heroscape that all need to work together because, of course, we want everything that we do to be backwards compatible. We want things from the past to be forward compatible with new units. We want those synergies to coexist. So I think, one of the pitfalls that we're trying to avoid is to create new things that don't work with the old things, or that obsolete things, or that just don't feel right given what the game of Heroscape is, and should be. So that's probably the biggest thing that I think it's important when you're kind of given stewardship of a game with history like this.
That's really good that they're keeping that in mind. He talked a lot about that in the interview from Casters Valhalla that he did.
But you have to kind of respect the groundwork and the foundations that have already been laid.
Well, for sure. Like, we don't want to break the game that we all love and enjoy. So, and I guess
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to my next question, and it's for Dylan. What are some misconceptions about game design that you often come across?
Misconceptions about game design. One of the ones that I see a lot is people sort of assuming game design exists in a vacuum, in a sense, where you have an idea for a unit and then you can just make that unit. That's a thing. It's just putting stats on some paper. What else could it need to be? Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but there's so much that goes into it, from the process that we've talked about already, with all the many stages of iterative design and playtesting and so much feedback that goes into it, but also production considerations and pricing considerations and things like, you know, maybe it wouldn't be possible to do a squad of 5 peanut-based figures because that would be like 8 molds and lit or more and be unfeasible, or things like that, where it's like, oh, something to think about that needs to go. That, and just the timeline that things operate on. My calendar is like wrapping up 2025, designing 2026 right now, and that's a fast pace. So it's a everything takes a while because there's a lot of artistry that goes into making a game, from our side of things, from Lee's side of things, from the graphic designers, the artists, etc. That all takes a lot of time to do. Um, and then the other part of it not being in a vacuum is coming from a customs community. A lot of that is making rules to fit something that already exists using figures that you can get off the shelf that were made for something else, which has its own restrictions in that you're stuck with a sandbox that's very restricted in terms of how the game is and what's available, but is unrestrictive in the sense that you don't have to deal with all of the other things that I've just mentioned. So that shift in thinking from someone making customs to someone making a living game is tricky, but very empowering for what you can actually bring to the game and actually move it forward into a new era, which is incredibly exciting.
For sure. Well, and like for me, like what comes to mind, because I feel like this is what I am, like literally what comes to mind is the conspiracy board with all the strings. And that is just making a game in general. So like you have all your cards of your murder suspects, but they aren't your murder suspects. You know, it's all of us and how we're involved. And then not to be like, I'm in the middle and I'm all the string, but it's like, it's literally like I'm working with y'all, I'm working with Dan, I'm working with Scott, I'm working with Jordan and the rest of our marketing team. I'm working with Andy from like over in like sales and distribution, occasionally checking in on Nick, who handles our web store. Like there's just so much involved in it besides designing the game. So, and like what's awesome about Heroscape and like making it is keeping it accessible, especially like to newcomers. So it's like, yes, we have basic game, which a lot of us don't play, and because you know we want the meat of the game, we want all the like the special powers and abilities and the synergies and all that stuff. So when we have some titles like the Battle for the Wellspring Battle Box, which you know that's for us, that's our game that we have for newcomers. Like I would like to ask Rowan, what do you keep in mind when you're designing a game that's welcoming for new players, but yet you still keep it engaging for veterans?
Sure. So you mentioned the pin board, and I like that analogy because there's a lot of complexity to a living army building war game like Heroscape that can be exceptionally overwhelming for somebody just thrown in. If your very first experience is, I've never played before, but before I even get the chance to play, I have to try to figure out what might be good so that I can build something that's in any way viable before I even start to actually play the game, that can be off-putting for a lot of people, or at the very least, not welcoming because they're not likely to succeed. So they're going to have an unpleasant time after having spent a lot of time trying to do that skill. So as you remember, Lee, when I worked on the battle box a lot, which was taking
Yeah.
the pin board of the complex game and not removing any pins, right? We're not making a different game. We're not making a smaller game or something, you know, we're not doing that thing where they teach math by lying to you about how math works and then going, okay, we're going to change it back now. No, it's the same game, but we're trying to cover up some of the pins and let you discover them organically as you experience the game. So here's just a few pieces. Practice with that. You understand? Great. We're going to move on to another thing. Here's another thing. So sort of removing some of the cognitive load of a new player so they can get straight into experiencing the heart of the game. Like you mentioned, there's basic mode, but basic mode is typically for a different audience. Lots of children do play it, and they play it as a complete game. They're having a complete experience. That's not master game, though. Master game is a completely different thing. And when you're breaking down the master game to
Yeah, my son, that's 6 years old, understands the master game version, and he beats me sometimes.
You can have a good time. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry. You just have to learn how to pilot this group of figures. And once you've learned that, maybe you can switch. Now you can pilot, and now you've learned two groups of figures. Now you're sort of into the game. You've learned about your order markers. You've learned about strategy. You've played a few different modes. You've played just battling. We can introduce scenarios. We can teach you about things like, oops, watch your objectives. It's not just about stabbing the other guy. Sometimes you need to get cliffs. And you can, in those ways, sort of titrate up on the complexity of the game until, ta-da, that wasn't so bad. Now you have access to the game. Now you know how to play all of the different aspects and steps. So, you know, when you're designing something from the ground up, you want to give that sort of titration across the figures that are in the box as well. So there are some figures that are very simple. They're not intimidating. You look at them, you know what they do. And then you can grade it up to some that are more representative of some of the stranger figures in Heroscape. And in that way, you have a sense of what Heroscape as a game is. You're not locked over here in the small portion going, oh, That's all there is. Every character has one little power and no interactions with each other. That would be a lie. That's not true. Lots of characters have lots of complicated things going on, but you can introduce that gently to people. So,
Well, for sure. I like to think the battle box was like what the master set was for a lot of us several years ago. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, it's the magical thing that, a younger audience is going to gravitate toward and hopefully grow up with, but like, it's, to me, like the battle box is something that's like, well, the master set is awesome, but it can be really intimidating to a new player. So if you shrink it down, and you don't want to like have it be a starter set, because if you call it a starter set, then it makes it sound inferior. It makes it sound like we took a lot of things out, or we removed a bunch of abilities and stuff like that. And it's like, well, no, like you're going to learn how to play Heroscape as you progress through the scenarios. And then after that, you take what you like and you combine it with whatever else. So like with Awashia and Kita and Anshu, it's like, cool. They work great with Rock Shot from the master set. And then later on in 2025, I didn't talk about them at all today, but in fall, we have the Heroes of Arboreus Army expansion, which will contain even more Dryan wizards and beasts. So like you just get to like
Dryan wizards and beasts.
And
We'll get
one
more
of the things
bonding.
I really like about Heroscape, and actually, like speaking of gameplay, what comes to mind is the question of compatibility. So I'm gonna ask Dylan this. So Dylan, how do you approach integrating old and new Heroscape units? Like, do you consider classic Heroscape when designing new army cards?
No, I consider classic Heroscape practically well making breakfast at this point. It's
Our cereal, Maro's.
I want Maros now. Goodness.
Beat the hive.
You've almost succeeded in fully distracting me. Thank you. But
See,
no,
they
I
worked
I
good
love
together.
classic Heroscape. It's what got me into wargaming. And I want to respect it and pay tribute to it and build on it as we go forward. We're in an interesting position where Heroscape has been out of print for a significant amount of time. So while I love all those classic interactions, a lot of our current players, probably most of our current players, don't have access to that easily. So we want to make the contemporary Heroscape as absolutely awesome as it can be in and of itself, self-contained. You can just get new stuff and have an incredible time. But one of the best parts of Heroscape are, well, one, the terrain, obviously, but two is the synergy web, which we've talked about. There's not a lot of war games out there where the synergy is entirely cross-factional and weird, where you can have a Roman legion being led by a weird alien mind controller. Like, that's the kind of thing that Heroscape really shines with. And so to have this super extensive synergy web built into the game, being able to like pluck parts of that out to integrate into new units going forward so that everything new we create refreshes something old is so fun. So, I mean, we've got the Tanuki Tricksters coming up in the spring, which are awesome Vorid ninjas
Tricksters.
who are synergizing with Vorids, of course, obviously, because they're cool and new, but also with ninjas, because those have some stuff going on in classic Heroscape and Shiori and modern. So it's this idea of trying to build on what's come before in fun, new, interesting ways and really refresh old units. And there's so much more I want to tell you about that, but that's probably going to have to live for next Renegade Con.
More on that in February, I think. Yeah, I think it's end of February. We'll see. What month is it? It's October. But yeah, so like it's funny that you bring up like synergy webs and stuff, because to me that's just another string conspiracy board thing, but instead of it being all these conspiracies or it's your murder board or whatever, it's like all these like cool abilities or like options that you have when building your armies. So with that, like there's so many like fun abilities that you can like really focus on like in Age of Annihilation, one of my favorites, I mentioned this earlier, is beast bonding. Like I really like that that's more prevalent in Age of Annihilation because I love sticking on my opponent and whittling him down. Like I just love it. And then Kita's just going around like hoarding glyphs and things like that. Like it's awesome. So this brings me to my next question. It's for Alex. How does player feedback influence the design process and how do you incorporate it?
Yeah, well, I talked a little bit about the process sort of at the beginning of this roundtable, but it's crucial. I mean, for myself, speaking of, conspiracy boards and the synergy web, when I got this job, one of the first things I saw was that classic document of all of those lines going everywhere. And I had two reactions to it. The first reaction was, holy crap. But the second reaction was, this is actually awesome because there's a depth to this game that I was unaware of. Because unlike, Rowan and Dylan, I don't have a lot of classic Heroscape experience. I probably played 2, maybe 3 times over the years, just sort of randomly when it was around. So this was all brand new to me and I had to learn very quickly. But it helps having wonderful people to work with. Dylan's got kind of a Rolodex of classic Heroscape in his head. Rowan's got all these cool scenarios under her belt, and it's just a lot of great experience. So I very, very quickly got up to speed, and that's the kind of thing that you need to lean on when you're coming into a new game. As a someone who does not have existing experience with it. So. I'm fortunate to work with a great team here at Renegade, but also the Heroscape community is great. And part of the iterative design process is trying to understand the whole kind of panoply of players, because there's a myriad of play styles and there's a myriad of different things that you can get out of Heroscape. I mean, some people are trying to be the best in the world, right? They're trying to rise to the top of the competitive scene and win tournaments.
Would it be me?
Synergistic, powerful list. Other people,
but I'll try
to make the weirdest possible combination of things somewhat viable, right? And then there's people who are just real casual about it. They play with their kids, they play every once in a while. It's it's not a lifestyle thing for them, but it's a fun diversion when it comes up. And we're lucky enough to have all of those different types of players in our playtesting Discord, and it's really interesting to see because not everything that we do is going to be 100% the jam of every single player type. But if we're doing our jobs right, there'll be something for everyone in every wave of product, right? There'll be something cool and goofy and fun. There'll be something that opens up really, crucial new competitive strategies. And there'll just be like cool wow factor stuff that is available to anyone who is just more casually interested in the game to be like, oh, here's a big, awesome thing that just does cool stuff. And I'm excited about how it looks. I'm excited to put it on the table. It's going to be a good time. So, the challenge is everything that we do, we're trying to have it be, balanced, fun, interesting, innovative. And we're trying to also, prevent unfortunate interactions, right? So to go back to the Tanuki Tricksters, for example, for a long time they bonded, or they didn't bond, but they had a movement ability that impacted tricky figures and Vorids. And one of the things that we learned through playtesting, and especially through our players talking about classic units, is that's a little too broad. There are some very scary, tricky units in classic Heroscape. And so we moved that over to a much more, yeah, exactly.
No more
rats.
Actually,
speaking of those, Dylan, one of the first games we ever played, you introduced me to that strategy, and I was like, thanks, buddy.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, welcome aboard. Get Death Reavered. But no, it's great. It's important to understand that because that is a thing that you have to think about. You have to take that into account. Like when I was working on X-Wing First Edition, one of the pilot cards in that edition was so game warping that we had to think about him every single time we did anything. Biggs Darkletter. He was he broke the rules of the game so profoundly that he actually became a huge challenge as a developer to, to work around. And so one of the things that the community is so great at is pointing out those pitfalls and, keeping us aware of it and putting it on the table. Like if one of our playtesters just thinks, oh, I think this would be really, really brutal with X, Y, or Z unit, they can play that game, put it in a report, send it to us. We'll go, we'll think about it. We'll put it on the table ourselves. And it's a way that we can utilize the collective knowledge and experience of an entire community to avoid some of those, problematic interactions.
So what this tells me is these Borgies that I keep pitching will not be like the Death Reavers. So we'll see.
Maybe Death Reaver Light.
We'll see. Maybe the nip. We'll see. Maybe they just bite people. But yeah, totally. Like player feedback really helps refine the designs, especially during playtesting. And actually, my next question is going to be for Rowan. What strategies do you use to ensure a game stays both engaging and replayable over time?
Sure. So obviously a living game is inherently has a bit of a leg up in this department in that new content will be coming out for it on a regular basis. It's living. So every time you release new content, wahoo, there's something new to do. But not just leaning on that, assuming perhaps a master set or something was going to be a standalone, what do we do to make sure that pieces that already exist remain interesting and offer replayability going forward? So we don't want people to have to always buy new content to get fun new experiences. We want you to have buckets and loads of fun out of just a few boxes of Heroscape, your favorite armies or not. So one thing we do to ensure that that's an option for you is to give each figure multiple ways it can be deployed. So even if there is an optimal way, if you've played a lot of Heroscape, there's some enjoyment in finding, like someone mentioned earlier, sure, there's an optimal way to deploy a figure, but is there a strange way to deploy a figure? Is there some bizarre combination that you can use? And we try to make sure that those do exist intentionally when we're making new figures, so that there are things to discover and find with just the pieces you already have. Playing them over and over again, part of replayability is there something to experience that cannot be gotten out of just one play? Yes, you can't possibly have played every faction when you play just one army. Not in the way that they want to be played. You could technically, as Alex mentioned, put one of every type of thing into an army probably, but you're missing out on their synergies and their webs and all of that. So as you play through different options, you get different experiences. As you play through the same option but with new secondary options, tricksters might be best with a ninja or a tanuki. Of course they're good with tanukis. They are tanukis. A vorid.
Other fuzzy critters that aren't bears.
There might be something silly you could do if, say, there were to be pools of molten lava on the board. Maybe that's not a very great strategy. Maybe it doesn't work out for you very often, but it's fun to try, right? It's fun to try. And those ways bring you coming back to the game and playing with the same pieces in new ways. We also have, as a game system, more than even just the people on this call are working on this game. We have our entire organized play department. Hello, organized play department. We love you. And they are constantly working on things that give you new options to play the game with new people in new places, with new stakes, new scenarios and formats and story blurbs to read. And all of these refresh the game and give you new options to play. So all of that together means that even without just buying new pieces, which again will of course bring in new synergies and as Dylan mentioned, I think pulling back to old characters and all of that is great. But even with just the box you already have, there should be lots of options to go off of. Lots of ways to play.
For sure. Well, and like one of the things that I love about Heroscape, so one of my favorite figures is probably like C tier or whatever, but I love playing with Rock Trot because with Rock Trot, you just sort of have Rock Trot hanging out, witnessing a bunch of death, controlling your little animal buddies and things like that. But then, if everything falls into place, a lot of death is happening around Rock Trot, then Rock Trot can still, unleash their super powerful attack. And like, to me, that moment is totally worth it. Like, yes, I'm probably going to lose my game, but I had fun. I enjoyed my experience. Maybe Rock Chat will cost less in the future. I don't know. We'll see. But, it's things like that, like just those interactions and experiences. Like that's what keeps me playing Heroscape. Like you won't necessarily get those experiences playing other war games. Like, yes, some are, like you're tactical and you're planning every move, but like with Heroscape, it's like, honestly, a lot of it comes down to the dice. Like, are you rolling well and can you last long enough, or did you become fodder for your
Dice definitely plays a big part of the game,
and unintentionally?
but if you're playing strategically well,
But
then
anyway,
that overcomes the dice, I
maybe
believe.
for Alex, how important is collaboration in the design process, and how often do you foster it within the team?
I mean, it's huge. It's one of the cool things about Renegade, actually, in contrast to some of the other companies that I've worked for, is we are not siloed off into kind of separate teams in the way that we were at, say, FFG. We're kind of looking at everything, right? We're looking at sketches. We're looking at sometimes I wake up in the morning and I see 42 new Slack messages and I get a little bit upset. But the positive side of that is that, like, we do have a sort of a company-wide input into what we're working on. It's not just the developers doing the dev thing. We're also thinking about the sculpts and does the sculpt match the gameplay, and how do we make a little tweak so that it feels more of a feels like a better fit, and is the art conveying, is someone floating in our artwork that shouldn't be floating because they don't have the flying power. We're able to like contribute to that in a lot of ways, and it's very cool. I think it leads to a better product overall. Obviously, I've already talked about how important the community is and how important our contractors are to the process, but the maxim of too many cooks, I think, does not apply to this team because we're all working together and we're all, contributing in different ways. And within the dev team, I happen to have a lot of tabletop wargaming experience, but I had zero Heroscape experience coming into this. So I've been leaning on, Dylan and Rowan in that respect to kind of bring me up to speed. Rowan produces some of the most, out there, interesting, wild designs that I've ever seen. And then Dylan will come in and say, this is cool, but like, I think maybe this is potentially a little bit problematic, and we'll rein that in a little bit.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about.
So it's cool, but like at the end of the day, what you have is you have a very synergistic, very collaborative experience. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of negotiation, playtesting. And the result of that, though, is I think a really fun and very, very thoroughly reviewed and thoroughly, analyzed army card at the end of the day.
For sure. Well, and like, I will say, I don't always
Seems like they're a really good team working together.
Of the army cards, like when you're routing them throughout the team, and then with our contractors and playtesters and things like that. But it's crazy. It's like, well, I have so many other things too. But like, sometimes you're like, oh, cool, they nailed it. This is like only like the second or third version, and then then it's like, I'm not gonna say how many versions, but I was like, okay, are we gonna nail this down anytime soon? We're getting pretty close to the wire here. So
yeah, some cards come together better than others or quicker than others, but we get there in the end.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, and actually, I feel like this brings me to the next question, since it involves design, and it'll be for Rowan. What advice would you offer to someone aspiring to design their first tabletop game?
Ooh, good question. So I would say that anyone looking to make their first creative endeavor in any field, but we're talking about games, so in games, should become as well versed in their field as they can. So dig in and play games. Play a lot of games. Play different games. You want to make a tabletop war game? Don't just play tabletop war games. Play some party games. Play some RPGs. Play something that you're not even sure what the genre is, but you found it on your friend's shelf. Sure, play that. And don't just play them and go, wow, that was fun. I've done my job. Rowan says I'm ready to go. No, play it critically. Think about what it is that you do and don't like, because you're going to learn just as much from both of those. What is it that didn't work for you? And then the layer beyond that is why. Why? If you can figure out why, you're doing excellent. You're ready to go and start working on your own things because you know what you like, you know what you don't like, and you know why. So you're ready to start trying to work on your own design. And I highly encourage you to just make something that you like. Don't try to make the smartest thing anyone has ever made. Don't try to like revolutionize the industry with your very first game. You know, do that eventually. Sure, please. I want to see it. I want to see the coolest game that's ever been made. Do make it. But I don't recommend trying that for your first game. You know, if it's recognizable, if it's using some mechanics you just learned from playing some other games, that's fine. Did you have fun? Are you having fun when you play it? If you're proud of your work, you had fun, then you're going to keep going, and that's what's important. Make another game after that. Make another game. Go back to the playing games phase and play some more. Go watch some movies. Learn from what you can and pull it together. Give yourself a wide base and work from there.
I love that you're like talking about other games. I'm gonna put a pin on that for a moment and throw out some questions from chat. So
Here we go.
I'm
What should we ask?
ask Dylan this. Flag bearers. What do we think about them? Are we gonna make them? Are we thinking
I
about
love
them?
flag bearers. I'm a big fan. I would love the chance to make more flag bearers. Also, with Ursine on the table, I would love the chance to make a flag bear.
I
I really
know.
thought you said plague bears, and I was like, that's a bizarre thing.
I mean,
No.
maybe for Rock. I mean, maybe for Rev. I don't know.
Plague bears.
No.
Just a bunch of plague doctors.
Oh, bears with their little masks.
We probably
yeah.
can't. We probably can't put 12 Valkyrie dice in that product for the original price, but the concept
No.
of a flag bearer
Oh my gosh, no.
is very cool.
That is one of my favorite Alex moments, is giving him a knight's army and having him read through the card and be, okay, so and then you roll 12 Valkyrie dice? I'm like, yeah.
I was like, this doesn't need to be this many
Gandalf's
dice.
dispatch, baby.
Mathematically, there's no reason for this. I guess theoretically your ceiling is 12, which is kind of cool. But
It feels really
Dice
great.
are
It's
cool,
it's the
Alex.
perfect number for using both hands.
right.
Roll your dice.
Right.
It's 12. It's not 10. It's not 8. 16's way too many, especially if you got little kid hands. Like, yeah. So
Scientifically proven.
yeah, science. Yeah, lots of research and experiences. Let's see. I'm gonna throw out one more question. Will we see any updated squads? So like there's 2.0. So like we've got Len 2.0, Raylan 3.0, and 4.0 next
Got a lot of
year.
Raylans.
Yeah, she's busy. She's a busy girl. What about squads? Will there be any 2.0 squads or any fun abilities or synergies that are missing from squads that we'll see return? I'm gonna ask that. Oh,
Oh no, Gasol.
No, it's not gonna happen. Really though, I think the answer is, in the grand scheme of Heroscape, probably. This is a game that's going to go on a long time. We're gonna have lots of stuff come back. Now, there were some questions hidden in that question. That was, are there going to be 2.0s of squads, and are abilities from old squads going to come back?
There was a lot, and then I added a little bit in there, so then that way it'd be more than just no.
keep me on my toes, Lee. But to the second part of the question, yes, there definitely are going to be returns of mechanics from Classicscape because, as Dylan alluded to earlier, there are a lot of abilities that people buying modern Scape who don't want to shell out a exorbitant amount of money for old figures don't have access to. So we want to bring those into the game in a way that is not, we're not just going to reprint exactly the card exactly the way it was, is what I'm trying to say. Is we're going to bring those abilities back in fresh and new ways that let you utilize some of those classic mechanics, but on somebody new.
Yeah.
Somebody cool that's also doing something you haven't exactly seen before. So get ready. It's coming.
Don't look for the return of old squads. Look for something that fills a similar niche in a new and exciting way. Not reprinting green scales, but maybe something that fills a similar niche. That kind of vibe.
That
Yeah,
or
I think
maybe like
That'd be a good
advantage of-
design.
Maybe.
You
The
don't want to
advantage
repeat
is that
things that already been done.
you're
You want
not,
new and different.
you're not just sort of obsoleting older units, right? You're creating something with a similar niche. You're creating something that's new and exciting, and you know gives every player a reason to want to go out and get it, including classic players. But they're going to have maybe a similar play style. They're going to maybe have similar synergies. And the other benefit is that, you know, to use green scales as an example, maybe the new unit lets you run both green scales and the new unit and dragons, and it all kind of works together instead of just being, you know, sort of a reprint of an old thing. That being said, you know, nothing is completely off the table. Like I could see a world in which certain, you know, historical units or something like that got an update or a refresh or something like that. But there's also a world in which we just go to that, you know, to that planet and we accelerate the timeline. And so we get to see, well, what are Gruts doing 1,000 years later, right? Like how has their technology evolved, et cetera, et cetera. So because it's the battle of all time and, you know, all dimensions and all possible planets, you know, you don't have to restrict yourself to just primitive Gruts. You can get Gruts from all eras. You can get ninjas from the future. You can get basically whatever you could possibly imagine can you know exist in this game, which is very cool.
Who knows? Maybe we'll see one riding a dinosaur. Anyway, next question. Back to the thing I put the pin in, games. So, well, just Heroscape in general, Heroscape and some other games, which I'll mention shortly. So Heroscape is one of the games that sparked my passion for tabletop games. Because initially I was like, oh, Monopoly, that's it, boo. I mean, whatever. Unless you have Powerpuff Girl Monopoly, like that version's great. Just based on aesthetic alone, visual aesthetic. Anything else is meh. But so Heroscape, like, is one of the few games that was just like, oh, there's more to games. This is awesome. So like that and Samurai Swords, which later became Yakuza, both of which are out of print, but they're awesome. Arkham Horror, mainly second edition. Third edition fills the need, but second edition was where it was at for me with Arkham Horror. But like that just spark and joy that I got led me to pursue a career in this industry. So what I would like to do is ask y'all, like, which tabletop games or designers have had the biggest impact on you and your work and why? And I will start with Dylan.
Okay, I will try and narrow this list down for y'all, or else we'll be here until the end of the next stream. Heroscape is what launched me into war games back in the day. It kickstarted me right forward, and I've been loving it ever since. I play a lot of Gloomhaven and Frosthaven weekly with a group that's been going since it launched. So if I'm not thinking in 3-dimensional hexes, I'm probably thinking in 2-dimensional hexes. I play a lot of
Gloomhaven's a lot of fun.
a lot of more narrative focused RPGs. I'm a theater of the mind type DM, more so than a crunch DM. Shout out to James D'Amato of the One Shot podcast and the Ultimate RPG guides for great DM advice. And then my board game design professor from way back in college who told me that I should be doing this professionally good on you. I am nice.
Nice.
And
Yay.
the game that I have the most hours in, probably aside from Heroscape at this point, I've never measured, is X-Wing the Miniatures game. Especially second edition is such a great distillation of that space fighter fantasy on a tabletop. I've played thousands and thousands of hours of that. So I guess shout out to Frank and Max and Alex, who I now get to work with, which was a little mini freak out when I found that out about 6 months ago. Yeah, so that's the very short list of the very long list of games that have influenced my whole thing.
Aw,
It's
shucks.
it's
Thanks,
it's
Dylan.
it's awesome, and then probably also weird because like I worked on X-Wing. Alex has obviously worked on X-Wing. You played a ton of X-Wing, and then like Rowan maybe touched it a little bit from their time with Atomic Mass.
We're
So it's
credited
like
on some of the same X-Wing products, Rowan and I.
yeah. So
Yep.
it's
Good
funny that
development.
like X-Wing has touched us all, and then like we all get to like work on Heroscape together. So it's like awesome that we all get to coming together and work on this game that we all find so precious. So next up, Alex, what about you? Games and game designers.
Yeah, well, I think, my first taste of, a world beyond Monopoly and Stratego and whatnot was Magic the
Stratego.
Gathering. I mean, that coincided with, me being 10 years old and moving from San Diego to Fargo, North Dakota, and experiencing, negative 30-degree temperature and being snowed in all winter. So you got to find something to do, right? I think that's why there's so many good game designers from the Midwest.
That's
We're stuck
probably why
inside the whole
FFG's in
time.
Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that was an incredible experience. Like I got into Magic during like Ice Age, Fallen Empires, like that very old school. Not quite. I wish I'd gotten into it like 2 years earlier and kept those cards, but obviously that didn't happen. So
No Black Lotus.
beyond that, no, none of the really valuable stuff, because like I was buying the overprinted stuff because they printed too few and then they printed way too much, and that's where I got in. But nevertheless, amazing experience. Really opened my eyes to a whole bunch of new stuff. And from a tabletop wargaming perspective, weirdly enough, I latched onto Chronopia and Warzone, which maybe some of you remember. It was sort of a mid-90s D20 system, competitor to Games Workshop's, Warhammer and Warhammer 40K. But that was my first real tabletop wargaming experience. I loved it. Like, it was a true line of sight. It was, I was getting mugs and books and random detritus from around the house to create the battlefields, wooden blocks, and that kind of thing. Got into the Games Workshop side of things in college, and did that for quite a while. Warhammer Fantasy Battles, I think, is great. On the more modern minis side of things, like I just learned a ton working on X-Wing, and James Niffen taught me a bunch. Corey, all the Jay Little, all the folks that worked on that game. I came in, I want to say like wave 3 or 4 of that, so fairly early on, but not right at the beginning, and just learned so much, under James and learning that system. And then, I still play a ton of minis games. I play a lot of Infinity. I got to try Marvel Crisis Protocol for the first time a few days ago, and I liked it quite a bit. So shout out to Rowan for working on that system. But yeah, I really gravitate towards that sort of head-to-head experience. So, in the board game world, Sekigahara is one of my absolute favorite games. It's such a genius little bit of design. From the same, studio. Twilight Struggle is fantastic. Chess is a brilliant game. I could go on. Oh, Radlands. Radlands is a wonderful, complete, CCG-like experience in a box. I'll stop because I could just continue, but that should give you an idea of what
I know. I could turn my screen around and be like, "This is what influences me." But
well, I never set out to be in game design, right? So apparently, I was doing research my whole life just by being super into games, because I kind of, story for another time, but this was never like my vision for my career or anything. Super glad I'm here, but yeah, apparently I was working towards this inadvertently and without knowing it for quite a few years.
well, it's so funny you say that because I'm pretty sure Frank was a chemical engineer at some point. Yep.
Yeah,
So
he worked.
yeah.
He worked for 3M, I think.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I was
it has
I was a chemical engineering major at one point. So yeah.
funny.
Look where I am now. So yeah. But
Look what chemical.
We can all become game day
Around.
designers.
now I take those chemicals and turn them into games, and then we get to play with them all the time. So
Perfect.
yeah, see, and chemistry still involved. I mean, there's plastics engineering and
Injection. There's different kinds of plastics. Yeah, absolutely.
why is this a terrible paint color choice? Yeah. So not just based on visual appeal, but also for coverage. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. Chemistry still comes into play. But Rowan, how about you? Game designers and games. What's influenced you?
Oh boy. I mean, I almost wish I knew exactly what Dylan and Alex were going to say, because now all I'm thinking about is, oh man, you listed some good games. We should play those. No. So, unlike perhaps several of you, I had the weird fortune of my parents being hobby board gamers. So I've been playing hobby board games since I was able to comprehend how a game worked, which shockingly happens.
That's the same for me, my family.
Everyone around
Games all the time.
play too.
Have a party. Hey, what game are we playing?
Past the Pigs all the time, which was like the first time I was like, I remember thinking really hard about what's the smart thing to do, and then pushing my luck anyway, as Dylan and Alex know from playtesting with me. Let's see, there's a game I only remember is Colorful Camels, so we'll let the chat try to figure out what that game is.
Colorful Camels.
See,
the only one I can think of is Camel Up, but I have not played that one.
No, that game's not
I've
old
heard
enough to be Colorful Camels. Moving forward from Colorful Camels, and I think 1313 Dead End Drive, or maybe it's just 13.
No, it's 1313 Dead End Drive. I still own it.
Yeah, see,
Yep.
that game was very formative for me. So those are the three I remember playing with my parents all the time as a child. And then flashing forward, in college, I actually did set out to be here and succeeded. So take my advice, everyone, from earlier when you asked about making games. Eat your Wheaties and don't give up. You can do it. You can also go to college for game design. So my game design professors in college, this is also your fault. You know who you are. And thank you. So they influenced me for sure. That was also around the time I played Betrayal, and that seeped into my brain and latched on. So that was sort of the shift from video games to board games specifically in my life. And then, going forward, all of the people I've worked with directly obviously influenced me, I think, the most, because I get to talk to them and extract from their brain their own ideologies, steal the bits that I like, and make them my ideology now. So thank you to Alex and Dylan who are on this call. Thank you to my friends and colleagues from Atomic Mass Games with whom I worked. And thank you to my wife who makes RPGs and is one of the smartest and coolest RPG people I have ever met, seen, or heard of. Thanks, everybody. And you too, Lee. You're pretty cool.
Thank you. I like to think I'm pretty cool. Yeah, since we're on the topic of professors and teachers, my high school history teacher is probably the one to blame who got me into tabletop games, because he was the one that introduced me to samurai swords. So we would have these moments after we studied something, we'd be okay, let's play a game that's themed around it. So that's why I played Samurai Swords. That's why I played Axis and Allies. And then there was this other game that I didn't care for, so I don't remember the name of it, but obviously that one didn't stick with me. But the other two definitely
don't like too. Learn from what you don't like too.
I think what it was the
right?
people. I think what it was who I played against. So I was just yeah, there's no way I'm defeating them. So I'm done. So I think that's, yeah.
It happens.
But yeah. Well, I think that about does it. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's been I felt like we had an awesome discussion. I hope everyone watching gained some fun and valuable insight. into the Heroscape development process. And I think we can all agree that working on Heroscape is a dream job for most of us, maybe all of us. I mean, it is the best game of all time, after all. So that's gonna be a wrap for today. Be sure to tune in later for how to paint with Roguescaper and the community spotlight playthrough with Vecna. So bye, everyone.
Well, that was the roundtable game designers. A couple points that I'd point out that stood out for me. The game designers love Heroscape. That's clear. And then they're really trying to make sure they don't break anything or make anything too powerful. So that's really good. They're keeping in mind all the previous designs from classic Heroscape. And that's cool that the original designers involved in some of the process of their new designs. And they're going to do common squads, which everybody wants common squads. I also really like the idea of figures that can change the landscape. So those crustacean crabs dropping lava potentially. You got a washer that can drop water, so they might be adding more. That's really cool. Well, hope you enjoyed the live stream, and we'll see you in one of the other videos over here or over there. Be the Hero Game Night.